You're a lifelong resident of Illinois. Can you tell me about the early part of your life here? You grew up in the Chicago area?
I was born and bred in Chicago, yes, and grew up on what they call the west side of the Columbus Park area. They called it Austin. And I guess I had the same type of childhood that most young people had in those days. It was during the Depression. Things were tough, and in fact, when time came for a movie, I have one sister. There were just two of us in the family. And movies were a dime, and my sister would go one week and I would go the other week.
It really taught you the value of a dollar.
Absolutely. Dollars were hard to come by then.
How did that perhaps influence your approach to the world of business?
I think when I got into business, it made me more careful. I'm sure I was conservative, but it made me pay more attention to the details to make sure that the money was being spent properly and that we got full value for whatever we did.
Tell me about the starting of your company. You told me the last time we were here that you're walking down the street in Chicago.
Oh no, I told you at that time how I happened to get into the toiletry business.
Right, that's what I'm aiming at.
I was out of school. I got out of school in 1940. And in those days, the country was just trying to get out of the Depression. We were making armaments for the Allies. And anyways, I was walking down State Street, and I passed a Walgreens drugstore. I went into the drugstore, or no, I didn't go in. I looked in the window, and I saw it was loaded with lipstick and nail polish, all that type of junk that women use. And I thought to myself that, well, come Depression or whatever it may come, they're always going to try to make themselves look attractive. And that's the type of business I should be in. So on impulse, I walked into the drugstore and I went to the telephone booth. I picked up the directory and turned to toiletries and cosmetics, and ran my finger down. All of a sudden I saw a company with the same initials as mine, LL, stood for Lucien Lelong. And I looked at the address. It was 55 East Washington. I'll never forget it, right around the corner. So impulse or instinct or whatever you want to call it made me leave the drugstore and go up to 55 East Washington and go up to Lucien Lelong's offices. And I discovered that it was a company just getting started in the fragrance field, and that this gentleman who owned the company, a man by the name of Stein, had gone over to France and made an arrangement with a famous couturier by the name of Lucien Lelong, and got the rights to his name and was going into the fragrance field. Anyways, he hired me, and I became the first office boy, the first window trimmer, and the first salesperson for the company.
How did you get started with Alberto Culver? How did that begin? You already had a good start in the business.
Well, Alberto Culver came after World War II. I had I'd gone into the Navy. I'd spent 4 years in the Navy, and when I got out, Lucien Lelong, instead of being a small company that it used to be, had blossomed tremendously. They were the largest in the business. Somehow this gentleman who owned the company had made arrangements with the government of France, Vichy France, I think they called it, that he was able to get essential oils out of France when nobody else could, and therefore he could supply fragrances to all the outlets, whereas everybody else couldn't, and his fragrances became very much in demand. Well, I went back to the company after the war, and it was interesting. He welcomed me with open arms, and he said, "How much would you like to earn?" And I had no experience. You know, you're in the Navy, you're overseas. So I mentioned a sum that I thought was fantastic, $50 a week. he shook my hand. He says, "You're rehired, $50 a week." I learned afterwards that I was a damn fool. I shouldn't say damn fool. I should have found out what salaries were going for in those days. Anyways, I came back and I was the sales director of the company. Now again at $50 a week.
They had a bargain, didn't they?
Yeah. Yes.
Alberto Culver was that was a product developed. Who developed that? The VO5.
Well, the way Alberto Culver came about, I gained a tremendous amount of experience with Lucien Lelong. And I was making a presentation one day for a new fragrance that we had called Taglio. It was in the Ambassador East Hotel in Chicago. And after it was all over, an elderly gentleman came up to me who had wandered into the room and said he had a new product that he would like to show me. And he thought we could do some business together. So I had nothing to lose. I went up his offices with him. And it turned out that he was one of the original founders of the F.W. Woolworth Company. And he had obtained a new type of home permanent wave. Home permanents were just then getting started. Everybody was using what was known as cold waves, and he had a heat wave. And he showed it to me, and he made an arrangement with me to gain distribution for him. He offered me $50 for every account I opened up, but I was limited to one account in every city of 15,000 or larger in the United States. And I also got $75 a week for expenses. So I found out I needed a car. I took the job because it seemed interesting to me, and I would make a lot more than the $50 a week I was making with Lucien Lelong. Anyways, I went out and I turned in an engagement ring that a girl had given me. Her mother had broken up our engagement after the war. She felt that I could.
Greg will tell me when we're ready to go.
Ready?
Okay. Let's pick up at the start of that. You said that you pawned an engagement ring. Why did you have to do that?
Well, I met this gal during the war. My ship had gotten hit by a kamikaze plane. I had some leave, came home, met her, and one thing led to another, and we became engaged. And after the war, her mother thought it over and said, "Look, you can't support her in the style she's been accustomed to." And so the girl gave me back the ring, and I traded the ring in for a used Studebaker. And that started off my career with the fellow with the home permanent. Anyways, I made every city of 15,000 or larger in the whole United States. It took me about a year and a half. And I gained a tremendous amount of experience at that time. And I was so naive that when I came home, I hadn't taken any money from them, and here I had $65,000 waiting for me. Huge sum of money. And the naivety came in when I started to pay my income taxes. I was so inexperienced, I didn't even know to deduct my traveling expenses from my income. And so Uncle Santa owes me something at this time. I don't know if I can ever get that back, though. I doubt it.
Well, with interest, it'd be quite a sum, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Now, one of the key players, well, in this whole endeavor has been Bernice Slabin, and she has been your right-hand person from the beginning of the company.
Well, she came in afterwards.
Okay.
Remember, now I'm traveling.
You're traveling.
I'm meeting all these wonderful people in all these towns. I'm meeting all these good-looking buyers, and I'm selling them, and I'm getting $50 a head, and I'm moving on to the next town. I used to make 3 cities in a day in the East. Well, $150 if you could do it was a lot of money. You know, 1946, 47, 48. Anyways, At the end of the time that I'd covered the country, this fellow offered me a job in running the business. He said, look, you've done very well. My wife and I want to retire. We'd like you to run the business. And he offered me a huge sum, $500 a week to run that business. He says, you can travel all over, you can do anything you want to do, but I don't want to build it anymore. I just want you to milk it. And I had met Bernice by this time, and unknown to him, we had gotten married. And that's a different story. Been married twice to the same woman.
Okay.
I don't think I'm going to tell you that.
Okay. You don't have to go into that.
Anyways, I had put my heart and soul in this business, and we built it up. In those days, we were doing about $3 million, earning about $1.5 million clear. And he didn't want it to go any further. He just wanted the business to stay static. And I was upset when that came about. I went home and talked to Bernice, and she was pregnant with our first child then. And I decided I was going to leave. So I left, and I left at the first of the year. This was in October of that year. And started out on my own. I formed a national sales company and went to the various companies that I had heard of and obtained the rights to distribute their products for them on a commission basis, and was doing very well. And then one day, here's how Alberto, Culver, and Bernice gets in the picture. I was having lunch with the president of the Thrifty Drug Company on the West Coast. And as usual in my type of business, I asked him if there was anything new that had come into his chain that he may have heard of that perhaps would be of interest to me. He says, no, there's nothing new, but we do have a product that called Alberto VO5, hairdressing and conditioner. He said, we've never seen a salesman. We don't do any advertising, but the women come in and ask for it. He said, the fellow who owns it had a stroke recently and was trying to get his affairs in shape and wanted to sell the business. Well, he gave me the gentleman's name, and I called him up, made an appointment, went out to see him that afternoon, and that evening we shook hands. I arranged to buy the business. And that was Alberto Culver. The business was doing about $300,000 a year, of which this VO5 hairdressing was about a third of it. They were selling, they were a beauty supply company selling to the various wholesalers and beauticians up and down the West Coast. After I talked to him for quite a while, I thought to myself the product had a lot of merit, and this was something you could run with and build. And so I made arrangements to buy it, and we did that. I brought it back to Chicago, the company, and then that's when Bernice got in the picture. I asked her please to give up her job and come to work for me. She had a big job in those days. She was a controller for a major automotive company, automotive supply company. And I guess my charm persuaded her. It wasn't the money, because she took a big hit. She was making $50,000 a year in those days, and she came to work for Alberto Culver for $5,000 a year. But she's made it up.
I think so. And she got you in the bargain.
Well, she had me.
Yeah, she had you in
She
the
had
bargain.
me.
That's true. But the company was very small. You had 5 people on the production line.
Well, didn't have anybody. When I brought it back, we hired 3 or 4 or 5 people and to start manufacturing the item. I'd never done any manufacturing up to that point, and I resigned all of the accounts that I had and kept a few of the salespeople, and we went out to gain distribution, which we did. And from that point on, it was all up, 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 up.
A key to that, though, was up until then it had been word of mouth and the like, in terms of they hadn't been advertising the product.
That's right.
And you went into television in a big way.
Well, we first got distribution, and we used newspaper advertising and magazine advertising. TV was making its advent at that time, and I thought this was a real opportunity, and so I started to invest in television. And television gave us a great big start, a big bump. We got I guess a jump start, you'd call it. And from that point on, every product we brought out, we invested strongly in advertising, in television.
You always did your homework on the marketing on that, seeing how the sales would increase and what markets to
Well, I was very fortunate because I had my fingers in all aspects of the company and paid particular attention to the marketing and sales of the products. You can't have a business unless you can motivate the people to buy your particular item, and that's where television was very influential. I delved into the TV business as deeply as I could and learned a great deal about it, and I think I became one of the experts in knowing how to use television. And in fact, as we started to grow for a little company, we became one of the 100 biggest advertisers. You know, when you think here we're doing $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 million a year, and our competition is Procter & Gamble, Colgate, Johnson & Johnson, and so on. And we were spending proportionally nearly as much as they were, percentage-wise of sale as much as they were, and maybe more.
Sure, I remember seeing the spots when I was growing up.
Really?
You were everywhere. Yeah. You brought some innovations to television advertising. You started spots up until it's 1972. It'd been 60 seconds in length, and you started buying 30s.
Well, everybody. I mean, the format in those days was you made a 60-second commercial, and as usually happens, as television became more and more influential, the cost used to go up every year, 15%, 20% a year. And I soon became aware of the fact that we were putting less announcements on the air, and that I couldn't be as persuasive to the public because while we put more money in every year, the cost that the television stations were charging for the opportunity to put a commercial on the air started to run away. And I sat down, started to think about it, and I thought, well, what we have to do is motivate the people with a 30-second commercial instead of a minute commercial. And so I went out to persuade the industry to let us run 30 seconds, and we finally accomplished that, and we were able to do what we wanted to do.
Now, over the years, your company has always been recognized as being very attentive to and very supportive of the role of women in the workplace. Tell me about the company's philosophy on that.
I won't take any credit for that, although I support it 100%. My wife was always pro females in the industry, and while she's not a feminist, she believes strongly in giving them as much of an opportunity as possible. And she used to support the YWCA, which in turn was heavily in favor of women in industry, and as a consequence, that's how it came about. And we probably have now at this time more key executive personnel who are females than males. Not that they're any smarter, but they're very competent, and they have a feel for the toiletry business, which we're in, or the consumer products business, I should say.
Let me ask perhaps another way too. What do they bring to the company that has enhanced the success and has grown the company with their particular viewpoints and their strengths?
Well, I think they're quicker to accept and understand a new idea and to work with new ideas. And I think they're less conservative than men are. And, you know, we have to be an entrepreneurial company. I'd like to think we are, and we have to, because we don't have the resources that the majors have, the huge companies. We have to move faster. We have to take advantage of opportunities, and I think women are more attuned to that area than men are, or at least the women we have.
Very good. How are we doing on tape? About 10 more minutes there? Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed in reading the materials about the company and looking at some of the videotape presentations about the company is that you brought a lot of people up from the very beginning of the company. They've come a long, long way with you. You believed in the people who started with you.
Well, yes, of course. It was a matter of practicality and finance, really, as well as trying to move them along. For example, when we started, when I needed more salespeople, went out and hired them, but I couldn't give them what Mr. Procter & Gamble could. I couldn't give them an automobile because we couldn't afford it. I couldn't give them the health benefits or all the various benefits that a major company can. And so we needed the type of individual who was entrepreneurial and was gung-ho, I guess, is the word. The gung-ho is a word that came out of World War II when we used to fight the Japanese. But anyways, the people we hired had to have their own automobile, had to take care of their own health insurances and so on and so forth, and had to be very aggressive. And as they produced for us, I felt it was incumbent upon us to push them as far as they could go and try to reward them as much as possible. And that's in all areas of the business, not just in salesmanship.
From production line all the way?
Oh, sure. For example, we recently had 2 people retire. One man was vice president of the professional division, and he started out here just as a laborer on the production lines.
That is going all the way up. Another hallmark of your career in the companies has been working in charitable endeavors in the philanthropic community. Your company's always believed in helping people along. What is your philosophy on that?
Well, having grown up when things were tough, maybe you became somewhat sympathetic or to those who didn't have anything or didn't have an opportunity, and you tried to help them as much as you can. And early on, I met when our company was becoming semi-successful, I met a gentleman who was a customer of ours. He was head of the Jewel Tea Company in those days. That was the forerunner of the Jewel food stores. And he was quite influential in the business community. And one day he got together a group of CEOs of various companies and put a format together suggesting that we try to help others as much as we could charitably. And out of that format or discussion we had came the resolve by a number of people who were there that they would contribute 2% of their pre-tax earnings to charitable causes. And we were one of the companies that agreed to do that, and we've subsequently followed through all the time.
You have a lot of your interests revolve around children's issues, health care, rehabilitation, and women's issues. Why have you focused your efforts in those areas?
Well, my wife Bernice had an unfortunate incident when she was very young. She contracted septic arthritis, which required her to have 2 operations. The first one, she was flat on her back for 2 years in the hospital, and they put a plate in her hip, which limited to a degree her ability to walk or to run or ride a bicycle and so on. And then she had the occasion to go back in again following that for another year. And ever since then, she's been, I'd say, more sympathetic and more understanding of people who have encountered problems of that sort. And as a consequence, she's led the company into major contributions to, for example, the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago. And as far as children go, my daughter lost a full-size baby in her 9th month, and she became very concerned about that. She found out she was a major risk. There's a technical term for it, I forget what it is, but in pregnancy, and to avoid that or to try to overcome it, she traveled around the country trying to find out the best people who could help her avoid that particular problem. And lo and behold, the people at Northwestern Hospital, they had a unit called Prentice, and that led to a number of contributions that the company made for that particular unit.
And they're doing wonderful work these days.
Yes, yes. In fact, we gave $1 million to, and we established the Alberto Culver Prentice Women's, excuse me, let's stop it for a second. What do we call it?
Women's Health Center.
Women's Health Center.
What is its principal mission? What's its goal?
You're closer to that than me. Why don't you expound on
I
it?
can't answer, but I can give you an answer. Primarily, it provides information to women about all kinds of health issues, a library, training rooms, seminars, and so on. And all of this is offered without regard to their ability to pay.
You want me to repeat what he said?
Well, you might put your own spin on it. It sounds as though it's a clearinghouse for information for women.
This room that we dedicated with $1 million contribution to Prentice was for the benefit of women in medical problems of all sorts, not just pregnancy, but anything they may encounter. Gave them the opportunity to go in and do the type of research that they'd like to do with the library that was established, to talk to doctors or people who address them at times, visiting physicians, what have you. And in other words, keep them pretty well informed.
Wonderful idea. You've also extended your charitable work to a very an issue or an area that's an interest that's very close to your heart in horse racing. You've worked on Jockeys Health.
Oh, you're referring to our jockey study,
right,
yeah.
Right.
Well, as you probably know, I have been involved in the thoroughbred industry for quite a while. We breed horses, we race the horses, we sell the horses, and during the course of that, we had occasion to employ a young man as an apprentice jockey who rode exclusively for us. After he finished riding for us, he was riding for other people, and as well as us. And one day, unfortunately, one of the horses fell, and the jockey went down with him, and he came up paralyzed. And it just so happened that shortly after that, an exercise girl who worked for us also had an accident, and she became paralyzed as well. And one day my wife said to me, you know, we've had a great deal of fun out of this particular business, and let's try to give something back to it. And she brought up the question of the jockeys being hurt and so on. And so, because we had a lot of experience with the Rehabilitation Institute, I went to see them, and out of that came a study that we financed personally, my wife and I, and in concert with the rehab. When I say in concert, we employed the rehab to work with us to see what we could do to try and help them avoid these type of injuries. And that's the story of the jockey study.
The two of you have always felt that it seems to me that the two of you have always felt a certain responsibility that business has to the community, to the people who are the customers. Can you expound upon that just a little bit about what sort of corporate responsibility the company has for people?
Well, you learn early when you go into business and you start to sell your product that the best thing you can do is establish a credibility with your customer. And you establish credibility by being honest with them, by trying to help them with their particular problems, which in turn helps your business. And perhaps that rubbed off on us, and I've always been a curious type of person, and my wife has too, and you get interested in other problems, somebody else's problems, and out of that comes, if not problems, opportunities, and comes the idea behind, if I can be of help, I'd like to help.
As you look back on things, what sort of satisfaction has that given you?
Oh, a great deal of satisfaction. Recently, let me give you an example. Recently, my wife sponsored or funded a project to set up a child's health care center at Northwestern Hospital. And while we had given money to numerous institutions in the past, I don't think we've ever experienced the type of satisfaction that we've experienced from this particular venture. It's not a venture, from this particular project we went into. I was sitting in the dentist chair at Northwestern, and one day a gal walks in who I didn't know at all, and she fell all over, telling me how happy she was and thankful that she had a place to bring her children while she was working. She was a dental technician there, and that was rewarding. And I've had people come up to me at different affairs, not necessarily connected with the hospital, but different affairs, telling me that they work at Northwestern and what a great joy this is and how wonderful it is. Now they feel that they can do their work well, knowing that their children are well taken care of, and it's been a happy experience. In fact, my wife from time to time will go down there just to visit with the children or with the people who we employ down there, and comes out of it in such a great feeling.
You spoke the other day about satisfaction too that your family has given you over the years. Would you mind going back into that a little bit?
I don't remember what I said.
Well, I asked you, I think, what gave you the most personal satisfaction. You mentioned obviously Bernice and the kids and the grandkids.
Oh, you're probably referring to my daughter in the business. Mm-hmm. Well, I was not aware of the fact that my daughter had a great affection for this business. In fact, after she graduated from college, I had taken her to Europe for a vacation, a present for her. And while we were on the plane having dinner, she told me that she had interviewed with the company and that she was coming to work for us. And she saw the look of astonishment on my face, and she said, if you don't want me to go to work for you, I can go to work for Bristol Myers or Colgate. I have job offers there too. So she came to work for us, and I believe she's been here now about 20 years. And she's a great strategic thinker, and she has a lot of her mother's genes in her, I believe. She's president of our USA business now, and she's doing a fantastic job. And of course, I get a great deal of satisfaction out of that. Although I don't let her, she's not as aware of it as maybe she could be. And what I like about it is the fact that will give our grandchildren, Bernice and our grandchildren, an opportunity to come into a company if they'd like to. And I never had that opportunity, of course, when I was young, and I was always envious of some of my friends whose fathers had businesses that, no matter with depression or no depression, or no matter how hard times were, they had a place to go. And I think that's as much as we can possibly give our grandkids, and that gives us, both of us, a great deal of satisfaction. Not that they may want to come in. They may want to do their own thing, I'm sure.
Well, I'm sure they'll do well at it. One final thing. I asked you the other day about the qualities of a good salesman, and we've talked about that a bit in this interview, but if you wouldn't mind telling me what makes for a good salesperson.
A good salesman, in my opinion, is an individual who believes in what he's selling or she's selling, develops the enthusiasm in themselves to present the item properly to the customer, and who develops a great deal of credibility with that customer, because you go back to see him a second or third time, and if what you've told them works out, it becomes easier later on. Honesty, ethical behavior, credibility, enthusiasm, believability in what you're selling, all that together, I believe, is what makes a good salesperson.
You've got that in large amounts.
I hope so.
I think you do. What did you think when you got the message from the Lincoln Academy that you've been nominated as laureate?
I thought, why me? There must be, of course, I wasn't as aware as I am now of what the Lincoln Academy Award stood for, but I thought there must be at least hundreds of other good business people, or people who are more charitable than we are, and so on and so forth. I'm not trying to appear modest, but frankly, I was shocked.
I think we're in good shape. Let's stop now.